In our world. In the United States of America, in the state of Louisiana, in the city of New Orleans, on 5909 St. Claude Avenue. On November 14, 1960, three 6-year-old African American girls were integrated into a traditionally all-white school. This was one major triumph throughout many tragedies that Black Americans faced. But first, let's rewind.
It all traces back to our national anthem, the song that represents the entirety of the United States of America and our many freedoms, liberties, and beauties. Remember the last line, the most impactful, the land of the free and the home of the brave. But did white Americans forget about colored people? At the beginning, America had thought of African people as different, so they took their rights, their voices, and their peace. Decades later, Africans took a large step for their culture. They changed the world forever through a movement called the Civil Rights Movement. To briefly summarize, the Civil Rights Movement was a nonviolent protest led by civil rights activists, but with any large protest, there are many triumphs and many tragedies.
I don't think it was a tragedy because the first couple years was very smooth, even though we were alone. So it really wasn't anything tragic that really happened. You know what I'm saying? It was really nobody there to do anything.
It took 13 amendments for wealthy white supremacists to understand that overworking, torturing, and murdering African Americans was inhumane. The mistreatment had to be stopped. After the U.S. Supreme Court officially placed the newest amendment on December 6, 1865, white people were not ready to accept that they were not superior to all people of color. To make sure the white population stood higher ground, they decided to plant the roots of the Jim Crow laws deep in Southern ground. They were a racist set of laws against freed African American slaves. This was to restrict their interaction with all white people. Simple things like playing checkered with a colored person was prohibited. Of course, this was not equal, but they were smaller steps closer to freedom.
Some people were so infuriated at the new constitutional law, they thought they should obliterate all those skin colors who don't match their own. They were the ex-Confederate veterans in Pulaski, Tennessee in 1866. They decided to make a hate group dedicated to terrorizing and mutilating innocent black men and women. They called themselves the Ku Klux Klan, otherwise known as the KKK. The time it took for the KKK to rain its terror across the South was horrifying. It only took 4 years. During this time, white terrorists got immunity faster than black innocents got recognized. The Jim Crow laws were completely unconstitutional, and the hate groups were created during the era of Jim Crow. However, Homer Plessy tested the Constitution. He refused to sit in an all-black train car. He was sitting in an all-white train car that was vacant of passengers. His refusal to get off the train car led to him getting arrested on June 7, 1892, in Covington, Louisiana. During his court, his argument was constitutional rights were being violated, especially the 14th Amendment.
John Ferguson was the judge for Plessy's case. He petitioned that his social rights were violated. So finally, in May 18, 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court delivered the verdict, Plessy versus Ferguson, declaring separate but equal in facilities of all kinds. Then again, a case similar to Plessy versus Ferguson. Now this time was with the educational inequality. But it was later denied because the school board did not see a clear violation of the 14th Amendment. 56 years later, the same educational inequality occurred again. But this one stuck, so Oliver Brown filed a class action lawsuit against the Board of Education in Topeka, Kansas in 1951. This was when his daughter was denied to be enrolled in an all-white school. Oliver Brown claims that blacks were not equal to white schools. A year later, in 1952, his case was delivered to Supreme Court and was filed under the name Brown versus the Board of Education. Judge Earl Warren had the last word on the case to make it stick or let it go. He read the verdict and he said, "In the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal had no place." With that one simple statement started the next revolution. In 1955, Rosa Parks refused to give up seats to a white passenger and was arrested in Montgomery, Alabama. With this simple refusal sparked many more boycotts, sit-ins, and demonstrations, mostly led by Martin Luther King Jr. The Brown versus the Board of Education generated African Americans to stand up and risk their own lives for others' freedom. They wanted more equality and less separation. Before the court could officially put in the word of desegregation of public schools, a group of high schoolers in Arkansas in 1957, who were called the Little Rock Nine, decided to go into an all-white school. At first, they were rejected to enter, but later were allowed to enroll in the school they were trying to enter in the first place. Now, to finish the story we started. The McDonogh Three, the group that should not be taken lightly. They were 3 6-year-old African-American girls who were brave and helped start a monumental impact even though they didn't understand what was occurring at the time. November 14, 1960 was the day that Leona Tate, Tessie Previs, and Gail Atene were picked up and escorted by U.S. Marshals. Coincidentally, the same day, same town, and same situation, another 6-year-old girl was picked to go to an all-white school. Her name is Ruby Bridges, and she went to the William Frantz Elementary School. All of these girls were the first to be integrated into an all-white school. The McDonogh Three were driven by marshals so they could feel secure. Driving by and seeing all the protesters, the girls did not understand the gist of the whole situation. Leona Tate recalls,
Them leaving, the only thing I could relate it to them is that I thought it was Mardi Gras.
sadly, she did not realize those people were there to call them derogatory names and hope to degrade them. As they opened that door, they were instantly screamed at with racial slurs. Not just names were being done to these girls, but they were spat upon, and these acts were done to dehumanize these 6-year-old girls who just wanted to go to school. Al Butler, Herschel S. Garner, and Charlie Burks were the compassionate U.S. Marshals who helped protect the little girls from the large crowd and safely lead them to the school building. All of the girls felt safe with the Marshals because they were strong men. Also, Tessie had her father with her, so she said she felt like she had extra protection. At the top of the steps, the McDonogh Three saw cops controlling the crowd. As they entered, a few white children caught their attention, but by the next day, they were nowhere to be seen. The white children's parents were not ready to see change and comprehend what was really the truth.
Tessie Prevost considered Mrs. Myers an unsung hero during the civil rights movement. Being in the school made them feel safe, since outside were uproars every day, and there were also beatings. These girls were 6, and these grown men and women decided to rip their dresses completely off of them. Recalled by Gail Etne, I had my dress completely ripped off of me. I was hit in the stomach with a baseball bat. Every day was the same. Entering the school, having the feeling of frozen fear, and going into the school having sanctuary and being able to learn. Until 2nd grade, after Christmas break, their classroom had increased by 25 other students, and only 2 of them were white. Only being the 3 girls in that school, those little girls were then transferred to T.J. Semi's formerly all-white school, but this time there were no marshals. Tate said she would never wish us on her worst enemy to experience the abuse that they did at that new school. The school, those students, and those teachers did not want them there. Enough was enough. The beating and the constant fear and the ripped clothing. When they went to senior high, they all transferred to an all-black school, Joseph S. Clark Senior High School, and attending there made them feel more secure. In the moment of things, they did not realize the impact they made on the civil rights movement. But now looking back at it, she realizes what she did. To this day, Leona Tate created a foundation called the Leona Tate Foundation for Change. Here, she shows the history of the impact of what the girls did and their background story. She wanted to make a museum so people would feel obligated to speak of the topic. So she thought of an idea of making an interpretive educational center. A museum was something she did not want to call it. With the center, she was able to make a conversation. 123-5 Deslon Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, is where the girls decided to put the monument to remember the impact they and Ruby Bridges did, so the legacy would not be faded by the other events that happened.
To this day, the Leona Tate Foundation is currently working to help spread their story and tell the truth of how diversity became into the educational system. Leona Tate says her favorite quote is, "God picks ordinary people for extraordinary things."